Dan Lust joining us here on the Bettor Sports Network, not only today on the 5-pack, but you'll be seeing a lot of Dan here on BSN. In fact, I think July 12th, we are getting set for the debut of Sports Betting Court right here on BSN. I think that's 6 o'clock Eastern. Dan, it is a pleasure to have you on board today. Welcome to BSN, and tell us about this show. I guess about 2 weeks from now, we'll fire things up, right?
Yeah, I think we're trying to keep it a little under the hood, but Sports Betting Court, you can have some sense of what we're doing. So I am a practicing attorney. I teach sports law. My last name is Lust. That is my real last name. That is not a stage name by any sort. So it's always good to have a little extra lust in your life. So we'll bring some fun to the law, obviously infuse some fun sports stuff in here, but we'll teach you about the law and maybe make you be a little bit smarter in fantasy, everything in between.
And I'm guessing that, like 20 years ago, it's like, oh man, sports and law, how's that? But nowadays, Dan, I mean, it's like insane. Every day there's another story dealing with some aspect of the legal side. And hey, I love to play one on TV, but I don't know what the hell I'm talking about when we get into contracts and money and, what's legal and what's not. But this is like a thriving market as we sit here in 2023, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I mean, you can even trace back to PASPA back in the day, legalizing sports betting. The reason that this network exists was because of lawyers once upon a time. And, you can talk any month of the year. There's a huge story that involves lawyers, right? You can talk about Live versus PGA. You can go back to Deshaun Watson, Trevor Bauer. If you want to go all the way back to Deflategate, there usually is a story that needs some legal analysis. Otherwise, you're just having people kind of pontificating and making up legal words, which sometimes us lawyers do as well. But, that's what they trained us to do. Come on, at least let us make up the
words. Yeah, you're a better pontificator than I am. You went to school for it.
That's
yeah.
That's you know what you're good.
You mentioned the legalization, and I brought this up earlier in the show. Obviously, we have seen a load of states approve this stuff, and we see commercials. It's everywhere. But there are still some holdouts, and I guess notably it's like California and Texas. I mean, these are huge population centers within this country, and yet they haven't joined the fray, if you will. And I was just kind of wondering, we had this initial wave and the excitement, and everybody passed it. And I wonder, what is the reason for the holdout in California and Texas? And for the long-term success, do you have to have California and Texas on board?
I guess a couple things, right? Like let's remember where the wave came from. And I think there was a lot of states that were hesitant to pass sports betting. People were worried about the vices. And then all of a sudden, right, the pandemic happened and there was a shortage of money and these states just needed money, and staring them in the face were these sports betting laws. If they legislated and they wanted to put these things into reality, there was a lot of money coming by way of just revenue coming into the state. People can look at the numbers in New York and Jersey, and it was a pretty easy solution. So now that we're kind of back to normal, so to speak, I think it's just a matter of just getting the legislator on board. I mean, I do a lot of work, Kyle, I think, as you know, in the NIL space, and that's a world where everybody agrees that athletes should get paid, but not all states have an NIL law. And that's a lot of because politicians are kind of tripping over their own feet. They want to be the one to pass their law. Sometimes they'll kind of pack too much stuff into these sports betting bills, same thing they do on the NIL side. And it's sometimes just something as so simple as I want my law to pass. I don't want the guy I hate, I don't want his law to pass. So I'll sandbag that. I'll filibuster that. And then meanwhile, us as the consumers, we don't get sports betting. So that's a lot of it. I know that's what happens on the NIL side. And I think we're getting there. But to your last question, I mean, I feel bad for the people that are in states where sports betting is not legal. You kind of just have to follow along and kind of play at home, right? But I think it's just a matter of time. Once states start seeing how much money is being made, it's kind of a no-brainer.
Dan, you mentioned NIL, and I saw, I guess it was late last week, maybe early this week, EA Sports, who, for people who follow it, they announced maybe a month ago that the college football game was coming back, the ever popular college football game, and they would be able to use the names, image, and likeness of these players. They'd cut a deal, all that, which was great news. Everybody got excited for that. I saw there's a lawsuit now with this and EA Sports. So what's going on with this lawsuit?
Okay. Do we have attorney-client privilege here? Is anyone listening to this conversation, or am I free to say it? I'm just kidding.
Well, you're only on the internet, Dan, and somebody's probably taping this.
And you have, I'll give you a little bit of legal lessons, right? There's this concept in law called expectation of privacy. Right now, you and I have none, so there's no attorney-client privilege. Yeah, so that's an interesting lawsuit. I'll give you the kind of the summary of what happened, and then I always try to give you where we go from here. So to preface this conversation, I was a consumer of the EA Sports video game. I think the last guy on the cover was Denard Robinson way back when, 2014. So I think everyone's excited that the video game is coming back. And then there was this note, right? Like the players might not be involved. It might just be generic random avatars. And then there was this announcement from EA Sports and a company called One Team Partners that, hey, we found a way to get the athletes in the game. And if they opt in, we'll give them $500 and we'll actually have the real athletes on the roster. There'll be some form of compensation. That sounds fine. But when you think about the revenue that EA Sports is making, that number seemed a little light. We all kind of said that, but whatever. There's no union negotiating on behalf of athletes. It's something. It's more than zero, more than they were getting for the past couple, years or decades when this game was being created. So I don't know. We just kind of put a weird footnote in. A company called the Brander Group, which is a group that we'll say negotiates group licensing deals on behalf of schools. So if you have like 5 or more players, some schools use this group called the Brander Group as their exclusive agent to help get deals for their athletes. So Kyle, if you're sitting here and you're like, wait, I didn't think the schools could tell the players what to do anymore. I thought the players controlled their NIL now. That's exactly the world that we're living in. EA Sports didn't think, and this is paraphrasing a little bit because they haven't put their legal response in, but my impression is that EA Sports didn't think they had to go to the schools to get the players' likenesses. These are now 2 separate entities. So that's the gist of this lawsuit. Brander Group is suing for fees relating to the work done for the players. Now, I told you I was going to tell you where we go moving forward. Whenever you have a lawsuit and you have something in question about where the revenue should go, where the profit should go, there's this fun little avenue, and maybe everybody knows this, maybe not all of you know this concept called an injunction in the law, where a party suing someone about maybe the creation of an album or a movie, and they want to sue to stop production on that movie because they want revenues and fees to be kind of allocated ahead of time. They want to figure out that part before money starts being made. My understanding, and where if I was Brander Group, not that I'm rooting for this, but I'm thinking that Brander Group is probably going to sue for an injunction here to stop the game until they can get this revenue worked out, which would not be good for our college football audience, not good for players. And I understand what Brander Group's doing, but, there is a real risk that the game could be delayed even further, which, it's now been 9 years since our last edition.
Why not wait another year, I guess. Dan Lust is with us. Conduct Detrimental is the name of the podcast. You're going to be seeing him a lot here with the Bettor Sports Network. Great to have him on board today. You mentioned the idea of a union. I'm just wondering, is a players' union coming to collegiate sports now? You think that could happen in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think that's the next conversation, right? People talk about how NIL is like ruining the world. We're really at the very tip of this conversation. Right now, the only money that we're talking about is money that's like third-party streams of revenue. So you're not taking money away from the schools to pay the athletes. It's just new streams of revenue that are, in theory, being created. There's some gray area, but that's generally what it is. When you involve a union, there is going to be some form of revenue sharing, right? That's what our pro unions do, the MLB, NHL, NFL, NBA. That's the world you're kind of looking at. So I think that's the next step. If people don't think that's a crazy for me to be saying that, Penn State's football team almost unionized this time last year. It seemed that some involvement from the Big Ten conference officials that kind of took it apart, but seemingly we're very close. And then the other aspect, let's say, no college football players want to unionize and they don't feel comfortable putting their name out. Maybe California has tried to now twice passed a proposed bill in the state of California, which would kind of impose revenue sharing on any schools in the state. So whether it's football, you're splitting revenue with football players, basketball, and so on and so forth. And that's going to be something that comes from the top. And again, before people think that that's insane, this whole NIL era was started when California passed a law that made it illegal to punish athletes for getting some form of compensation. So it started with California, and there are legislatures in California that are very adamant on passing this weird revenue sharing bill. So if that happens, you've just cut through the noise a little bit and got right to revenue sharing when, you don't need a union. You don't need someone to step up to the plate. But if people want to look further into the Penn State situation, just do some light Googling into quarterback Sean Clifford, who's now in the NFL. So big name guy that was associated with it.
And to follow up on that California stance, whether it's sports law or any law, what California does usually dictates what the rest of the country does.
Unless it's sports betting. Unless it's
sports betting. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, usually California sets the law. Everybody else has to fall in place, but not in that case. Dan Lust is with us. Dan, you mentioned Liv and PGA. That news came out, I guess, 3 weeks ago. Kind of surprising, shocking. Even the players involved had no idea it was going to occur. The latest is now Congress is getting involved and wants to know about this deal. What are they going to find? What do they want to know? Is there any way that the U.S. Congress can stop a partnership between LIV and the PGA?
I'm going to say, they're not launching an investigation for no reason. So I guess we'll backtrack a little bit. people will remember the day that they announced this settlement of the case, we'll call it, when they decided to resolve that case. The initial press release called this a merger between Live and PIF and the DP World Tour and PGA. Okay, this big merger. When you use a word like merger, that's going to involve some inquiry, maybe not a full-blown investigation by the Justice Department. If you have two massive entities merging and creating a monolith enterprise, that's going to be some cause for concern, right? Kyle, even before this merger, right, at the beginning of this lawsuit, this time last year, the Justice Department said they were looking into whether the PGA Tour by themselves was this kind of monopolistic enterprise in terms of what they did to allegedly kick out these Live Tour golfers. So, yeah, Justice Department certainly looking into it. There's some letters from congressmen. Again, a lot of, I don't know, we'll say again, pontificating, but people want to put their names on it. Hey, here's a fancy letter I wrote in my letterhead, and I'm looking into the PGA and Live. Okay. Everyone relax a little bit. We'll see what comes of it. But the Justice Department was already looking into the PGA. Rest assured, without the tweets and the letters being made public, they would already look into this. So that's number one. But again, to at least the initial point, what I want people to pay attention to, initially this was announced as a merger, and they've changed the branding of this. You go back to the PGA's website now. It's not called a merger anymore. It's called a partnership. They're working with one another. So they've gone so far as to go back on the website like a day or two later and change the verbiage. So it tells you that somebody somewhere in the PGA decided to rethink this thing.
Yeah, words have meaning, and the PGA may find that out. Visiting with Dan Lust here, and Dan, I guess to bring this full circle, we were talking about the legalization of sports gambling, and my producer Heather Klein sent me a link earlier today. I think you were visiting with a station in DC, and I know you've talked about this on your podcast. And there was, kind of this this thought of one of the NBA insiders. I think it was Shams Charania, who works with The Athletic. He's been covering the NBA, kind of an insider and breaking down news, kind of breaking stories, if you will. The idea that he is also at least a partial employee with FanDuel, and the idea that some of his reporting can somehow adjust lines, when people catch it early. And I thought you brought up a good point. It's not so much who's creating that news or sending out the news. It's almost like the consideration here is who is providing that news to Shams. And are they gaining an edge when they provide this unnamed sourcing says that this trade's going to happen, or that this team has a season-ending injury? That person providing the news, who may be with the team, maybe not with the team, maybe is high level, maybe is low level, who knows? But that does give them the ability to make some coin on the movement before it happens on that line, doesn't it?
Shout out to Heather for doing her research for that clip yesterday. So yeah, no, I got a lot of calls on this particular question, and I guess to give some background, I'm sure people that are listening to the show understand the situation, but this is not something that us in the legal field are just coming upon. Oh, who could have thought this would happen? A couple months ago, people remember where Adam Schefter was not yet re-signed by ESPN, and we made the comment on our show, and I was on different platforms. I went on panels with sports betting experts, and I said, and Kyle, I'm sure you remember, Adam Schefter was the one that had the scoop that Tom Brady was coming back to the Bucs. I remember that. I, as a casual bettor, I'm by no means a shark, but I dabble. I saw the tweet, right? And Tom Brady's coming back, and I placed a wager. I didn't do anything wrong. I had no inside information. I saw the tweet. I got the line. I think it was like at the time the Bucs were like 25 to 1, 30 to 1. So there was maybe a 30-second window where you could get the bet in because of the Adam Schefter tweet. And then the line moved to, I think, 7.5. So if you caught it, you could cash out, make a good chunk of change. Obviously, the Bucs didn't go on to win the Super Bowl, but we benefited as bettors, and the house lost in that scenario. So I said, hypothetically, let's say Adam Schefter was working for a DraftKings or FanDuel at that time. And instead of tweeting it out, he was about to hit send. And he said, you know what? Let me actually call FanDuel. Let me actually have them take this off the board. Let's screw DraftKings, right? Or let's screw whoever else. Let's take that off the board. And I've given that hypothetical to sports betting industry insiders for the past, 6-9 months. And, the answer to that was like, well, this is not really regulated. So in theory, there wouldn't be nothing wrong with that, but that's not what we have. And it's a hypothetical. So don't worry about it, Lust. Stop asking crazy hypotheticals. So now we're in this world where Shams, right, sends a tweet out. And this is where I think no one's talking about this part of it. Shams sends a tweet out that makes it seem like he got duped. Somebody told him that Scoot was going to go number 2. I was holding a ticket, from a couple weeks back at plus 160 with Scoot. So unfortunately was not putting a lot of money down on the Scoot stuff because of Shams. But the question was here, what was the benefit of someone lying to Shams? Because if you just watch the draft unfold, number 2 went Brandon Miller, number 3 went Scoot. So the reason for that lie, again, I'm going to call it a lie or deception or whatever Shams was told, was not for some type of NBA benefit, because there was no smokescreen. Nothing happened. 2 went was, as you know, to Brandon Miller, and 3 went to Scoot. So the person that I think maybe deceived Shams, you have to think of how could they have benefited. That Brandon Miller line went from, I think, right in the vicinity of minus 400 the day of the draft. Post tweet, that was like plus 400, plus 500. So there's a lot of entities that look at these suspicious betting patterns. And I'd be looking very closely at the people that placed large wagers on Brandon Miller. How would they know? Why, in the face of Shams' tweet, do they know then to put the bet down at plus 400 for Miller? So obviously the line then reverted. By the time the draft came back, Miller was now the heavy favorite. I think, again, it was now minus 400, minus 500, I think even minus 700. But someone knew at that point in time, and someone seemed motivated to tell something to Shams that was not true. And then just to put some little sprinkle on it, Woj obviously dunked on Shams and it said that Brandon Miller was the pick all along. So maybe Woj knows something too here, Kyle.
Well, it reminds me, was about a month and a half ago, the Alabama baseball coach.
Oh yeah,
and that didn't happen in Alabama. What was it? Betting in Ohio, I think it was, or Pennsylvania, and they saw the line and all this money come in, and guy lost his job. And I'm sure there's probably legal ramifications maybe coming on him at some point.
This is a fun concept. And again, if you and I do this more, I'll teach you all my little fun betting concepts and legal concepts, but it's concepts of proxy betting, right? This was not a situation in Alabama where the coach actually made the bet, and that would be some inside information. It was alleged that this person made a phone call to someone else who made a bet somewhere else. So the question is, I mean, when you're betting through a proxy, how are you going to figure that out? How do you figure out that the person had inside information? Calvin Ridley, people know that story. You know, now it's almost 2 years ago. Calvin Ridley placed a bet in his own name. That's how these advanced technologies figured it out. They saw Calvin Ridley place the bet. Alabama, right? This situation had to get a little more technical, and some advanced software figured this out. So again, without getting into specifics, sometimes I know too much on the inside as to how things are figured out, but proxy betting is a very big concern. So Alabama is a situation people look very closely at. Maybe people heard about the Iowa and Iowa State betting scandals. Very different than what happened in Alabama. That seems to be a unique bird in this day and age.
Well, unfortunately, I don't think it's the end of it. There's going to be more of these issues. You mentioned Ridley. That was a huge name in the NFL going down. We've had some Detroit Lions get hit. There could be more down the road. Certainly, there will be a messy little run here, probably a 5 to 10 years before everything becomes a little more regulated, a little more normalized from state to state and from sport to sport. For all the latest on whether it's sports gaming and gambling and wagering, NIL, Live, PGA, whatever it is, Dan's your guy. You see the Twitter link there at Sports Law Lust. Podcast is Conduct Detrimental. And again, he's going to be a regular part of everything we do here at BSN. So, Dan, welcome aboard. Good to have you on today, and we'll make sure it's not the last time, okay?
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Kyle.